everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Andrew Wilson, Deputy Secretary General at the ICC. Andrew, thanks so much for coming on.
Delighted to be back with you, Brittany.
I always enjoy talking with you because you provide updates on where you think we are at in the latest regards to tariffs and their impact on them. So I would love to get your thoughts on where we are right now. Recently, President Trump announced again he will impose a 100% tariff on movies made outside of the United States. And this is what he said. He claimed that, quote, "Our movie-making business has been stolen from the United States of America by other countries, just like stealing candy from a baby." What is your reaction to that announcement?
Well, I think the overall picture, and maybe we can come back to this, is still one of prevailing uncertainty within the business community writ large. I think specifically with the movie tariffs, I think the president is giving us a mystery worthy of the greatest Hollywood movies, in that tariffs are typically only applied to physical goods, merchandise, and there's a reason for that. When you import goods, there's a moment where the package or the container or the shipment crosses the border, a tariffable moment. There's a complex system of codes, classifications that underpin what tariffs are applied to which goods. There is no comparable way of applying a tariff to an intangible asset, to a service, essentially. So the question I think we're all grappling with in the business community is, how is the US administration, specifically the US Trade Representative's Office, how are they going to go about applying tariffs which are really designed for physical goods to intangible assets? How would that be designed? What would the value placed on the movies be? How would it be calculated? And what's the moment where the tariff applies? So a lot of mystery, a lot of uncertainty, and I'm sure there are a lot of people in the administration in DC frantically trying to work out how this thing can work in practice.
Okay, it makes me feel a lot better that you just rattled off 20 questions that I have, because when I read this, I was confused, but I figured, hey, let me go to the experts, see if they can make sense of this. And it seems like everyone I've talked to about this so far has been a little confused about what exactly would be tariffed, all production costs. Do you think that the administration even knows what exactly that means?
I suspect not. I suspect they're having to work through a number of possible options. We know that a number of countries in the past have looked at taxing intangible assets or applying kind of a proxy for tariffs through digital services taxes, but we know the administration doesn't like it when other countries use those measures. There are withholding tax measures that governments have tried to apply, but they haven't been really effective. So I think it's really difficult at this point to know what the policy measure or what the instrument is going to look like, how it can be applied effectively. And the key question is, what are the thresholds? What constitutes a movie produced overseas? Is it, if it's scripted, is it the filming? What percentages of the filming? So I think on the design and the nature of the instrument, there's a whole host of unanswered questions, and it's very, very difficult to see how the administration is going to address those in a way that could be effective.
And I think, like you said, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's more questions than answers on what and how and who this would exactly impact. But what do you think this means for the industry and international films in general? Do you think this would incentivize production to move to the United States?
It really depends what that tariff or what that taxation regime ultimately looks like. I suppose there could be some incentivization at the margin, but I think our view, as with some of the other tariffs the administration has outlined, is, first of all, will they really genuinely provide an incentive for reshoring? Do you really have to think instead about broader issues, subsidies, incentives, availability of skilled labor in particular, I would say, in the film industry? Or does it simply jack up the price of producing movies to where less content gets created, or where US consumers have to pay more for streaming services or when they go to the cinema. So I think it's very uncertain, but I don't think this is a surefire bet from the administration in terms of the implementability of any new tariff, but also its effectiveness. Is it really going to have the desired policy effect of reshoring movie production or the filming of movies? And I think there's some very interesting research that's just come out this week from the Peterson Institute in Washington, D.C., that suggests that the broader tariffs that have been implemented by the administration are unlikely to have that much impact on US employment. They suggest jobs growth, even if there's widespread reshoring of manufacturing production, of less than 1 million new jobs. So it's pretty paltry in terms of the net outcomes from a job creation perspective in the manufacturing sector.
And then when you're thinking about how exactly this would be passed on to the everyday consumer, I'm thinking about going to the movies when I was a kid versus going to the movies now. I mean, ticket prices have jacked up to the point where going to the movies was something you could do with your friends, an activity you could do every Friday night. Now you have to be a little more selective when you're looking at those movie prices and then snacks on top of that. I mean, that is an expensive outing. So do you think consumers will really see this? And the impact on the global economy too at large?
So I think there is reason to believe that if there's a 100% tariff on foreign produced movies and it's applied in a pretty broad way, some or all of the cost of that will be passed through to consumers. Writ large, the impact of the tariffs that have been implemented to date on physical goods haven't really jacked up the headline rate of inflation in the US so far, partly because of a lot of the very smart stockpiling we saw from companies before the tariffs came into effect. But we're already seeing it in areas where there's a high import dependence and limited ability to stockpile. Bananas, which I think we've mentioned previously, shrimps, I think, have gone up by an average of 8 to 10%. So I think it's inevitable that there would be costs passed through to consumers, which just makes it more difficult, more expensive for Americans to go to the cinema. I think the broader global question really is, what kind of precedent do you set? And the digital economy one of the reasons it has grown so rapidly and so successfully with great dominance from American companies is it's been free of tariffs and largely free of trade barriers. If the US sets this very, I would say, damaging precedent of now placing tariffs on an intangible product in the form of films and movies, then what's the risk that other countries follow the lead? And what's the exposure of US digital services exports to that sort of, if you like, innovative policymaking?
I was going to ask you exactly what precedent does this set? Because as you said, tariffs before are on physical goods. Something goes to the border, you see the tariff go on it. That way it's a complicated process that I'm really watering down there, but that's essentially what it boils down to. Movie making is completely different because the questions of what exactly gets tariffed, who exactly gets tariffed, how much they get tariffed, there's a lot of questions there. Do you think that this sets a precedent on the Trump administration, starting with the movie industry and then going further and continuing to tariff perhaps more intangible industries and items?
I mean, it's difficult to say where the administration will ultimately go on this, but I think what we can say at this point is the announcement and any possible measures really kind of open up a can of worms or a Pandora's box in terms of taking tariffs and applying them to services. And we know several countries in the past have kind of looked at this, decided against it. But I think this is a very dangerous territory to get into, particularly at a time when many governments are searching for new revenues, and this might seem like an easy way to fill government coffers. So I think the administration has to be careful, and we all have to be careful, quite frankly, about the international ramifications and the downside risks of opening up this new frontier of applying tariffs to services and intangible goods.
I want to read some more tariff news that we saw this week. The EU proposed increasing its tariffs on steel to 50%. And I'm quoting Politico's reporting here, but they reported that the proposal is meant to be a stepping stone toward a better deal with the United States, which also charges 50% on all steel. Does that indicate to you that President Trump's tariffs are having this chain reaction around the world?
I think we need to put this in context, and I always think, there's been a lot of focus this year on tariffs. It's really dominated the media cycle, very understandably, but I think we need to avoid being too alarmist. And I think one thing we've seen just in the last 24 hours is the WTO is a little bit more optimistic now on trade growth this year. And one of the primary reasons for that is, by and large, countries have not retaliated in a like-for-like manner to the new US tariffs. And I think that's broadly been a positive dynamic that we've seen this year. The global trading system is not falling apart. Merchandise trade is continuing to grow. However, clearly the shift in US policy has risks of causing, as you said very rightly, a chain reaction. And this looks like the kind of effect that we really don't want to see, where governments become concerned about cheap goods, or so-called cheap goods, being diverted into their economies, and therefore they respond not to the US but to other countries more broadly with punitive tariffs. We know the EU considers itself to have an acute problem with the steel industry and preserving the competitiveness of domestic steelmakers. That's understandable. What we don't know is the degree to which there has been genuine trade diversion, and whether the measures are warranted. What I can say is they appear to be inconsistent with the EU's WTO, World Trade Organization, commitments, and they risk, I think, catalyzing a series of reactions that could be very, very damaging. So I think we have to be vigilant on this, that it isn't really the start of a process where we start to see far more protectionism, far higher tariffs in the global economy writ large, because that will do untold economic damage beyond anything that the US can do on its own.
I think you brought up a really good point, is that tariff news dominated the headlines over the past couple of months. And the tariff whiplash that we saw back in April and beyond, we're not seeing that much of it right now. News is still cropping up, but not at that breakneck speed as it was. So keeping that in mind, what specifically are you looking out for next? What are some of those signposts for you?
I mean, I think from our perspective, I think this is generally agreed or generally held within the business community now. The US tariffs are here to stay, whether it's an effective rate of 10, 15, or higher than that. The US tariffs seem to have a degree of stickiness to them. I think one of the key considerations is, how do countries respond? And I think the EU move on steel is a potentially dangerous precedent and something we need to be very, very alert to. I think the bigger question that we have, and I think we can approach this in an optimistic way, is what we've seen over the last 8-9 months, as things start to settle down, an opportunity to reflect on the design of the international trading system writ large. So is there an opportunity to come to the table through the World Trade Organization or through other coalitions and really think about rewriting and recrafting global trade rules in a way that better accords with the realities of 21st century commerce? And as part of that, there may be an opportunity, without having to resort to tariffs, to address some of the legitimate concerns the US administration has expressed. So the next few months, we'd like to see an effort, not just to have bilateral negotiations, particularly with the US, or bilateral deals between the EU, Canada, or EU and Australia, but really to think through in a broader multilateral setting, what are the opportunities to create some kind of grand bargain that could really modernize the global trading system and take international commerce genuinely into the 21st century in terms of the underpinning rules?
Well, there's certainly a lot to look out for. And as these developments continue, I hope you can come back on. I always appreciate your insight and your expertise here. Andrew Wilson, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Brittany.